Yeah. So, firstly, I'm really overwhelmed with the welcome that was given to me. The standard which has been set, the expectations have been set really high, and I'm able to live up to those expectations today. And before I start my lecture, I would also like to, make. I had noted few things like we started the lecture, the webinar with the national anthem, and that was really a pleasant surprise. It's so nice that whole patriotism sets in, and I wanted to give a small I wanted the students to I wanted to give them a small message today before I begin the lecture. And because of the national anthem, I feel that this message which I wanted to give today about corruption, I wanted to instill a sense of patriotism in the participants today. So I was really happy with the beginning of the webinar with the national anthem. And now, before I begin the lecture, I wanted to tell you that yesterday, while I was just sitting in the living room, I came across this book called as Transforming Indians to Transform India. I immediately thought that I need to draw an analogy of the title of the book in my lecture today while giving that message to the participants today. So now if we need an ideal judicial system in our country, the officers of the court also need to be ideal. So in my opinion, to be ideal lawyers, it is not only important for lawyers to have knowledge, but it is equally important for them to be honest and behave lawfully. I think we can do our jobs effectively if we cheat or lie or indulge in corruption. At the same time, as lawyers, we all have clients who come to us and who say that, I just want to get out of this by hook or crook. You do it legally or illegally, just get me out of it. I think that is the time when we lawyers have to play a role and break the chain of corruption. Today, we all are, so busy breaking the chain of corona because we all want to save our lives. Similarly, everybody should think about our country and think how to remove corruption from this country and break that chain of corruption. So I think I will not go too much in depth about this, and it's high time I begin with the contents of the lecture now. Now, what is criminal law? I don't think I can make this session interactive, but Samvita, I think I want to share the screen, so you will have to make me the co-host.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I will make you the host. Harsh.
Today, these are the contents of today's day, day one. What is criminal law? Now, let's start off. So, what is criminal law? Criminal law is the body of law that defines criminal offenses. It regulates apprehension. Apprehension means arrest. It regulates charging, and it regulates trial of suspected persons. At the same time, it also defines what are offenses and has prescribed penalties and modes of treatment applicable to the convicted offenders. This is, in short, criminal law. Now, criminal law is divided into two categories. One is substantive law and the other is procedural law. Now, substantive law gives you the definition of the offenses. Like, for example, Indian Penal Code. Indian Penal Code will define what is murder, it will define what is theft, it will define what is robbery. But it will not explain you the procedure of arrest, it will not explain you the procedure of trial. For that, we have to refer to procedural law. So, Code of Criminal Procedure falls under procedural law. Today, what I am going to teach the students is the procedure, right from registration of FIR till conviction and post conviction. This is what I'm going to cover in these 3 days. Now, when I come to procedural law, that is CRPC, how does criminal law set into motion? That is the first step. A criminal law sets into motion when an offense is committed. Now, what is an offense? Offense is defined under the Indian Penal Code, it says an offense is an act or an omission which is made punishable under law. Now I need to explain you all the difference between an act and omission. How in some cases an act becomes an offense and how in some cases an omission becomes an offense. I'll give you all a small example. For example, there is a sandwich vendor outside the college and he makes sandwiches. And all the college students obviously in their break, they want to go there and have sandwiches. Now, there is one particular student who is very particular, very patriotic, and he doesn't like filth in his country. So he ends up in an argument with the sandwich vendor saying that why are you creating this filth around? The sandwich vendor, in a fit of rage, who has a sandwich knife in his hand, just stabs the student. What has happened here? Sandwich vendor has done an act which amounts to an offense. Now, what he has done, he has committed an offense of grievous hurt. He has committed an offense under section 320 of IPC, which is made punishable under section 325. Now, this is an example of an act. It is an overt act. Similarly, sometimes an omission on a part of a citizen can also amount to an offense. How? For example, we are duty bound to file our income tax returns. Now, if we don't file our returns in the time prescribed, we get a notice from the income tax. We don't comply with the notice also. We have omitted to do the duty which we are bound to do. Non-filing of IT returns is an offense under section 276 CC of the IT Act. So I just wanted to explain you that how an act can also be an offense and how an omission can also amount to an offense. So this is an offense. Now, types of offenses. So I have seen a lot of lawyers who come into practice. They start handling briefs, but they are not able to explain the difference between cognizable offense and non-cognizable offense. What is cognizance? Cognizance means to take note of something. So cognizable offense is an offense for which a police officer can register an FIR immediately. He can take cognizance of that offense. So usually all the serious offenses are termed as cognizable offenses. Now, I just wanted to tell you that any criminal lawyer who practices criminal law has to go to court with this. 3-in-1. This is the Bible for all the lawyers. When I joined my senior, I was told that you cannot enter the court unless and until you don't have this book in your hand. So CRPC, IPC and evidence in this book. CRPC has a schedule which will tell you which offense is cognizable, which is non-cognizable, which is bailable, which is non-bailable. So cognizable offense is an offense for which the police can register an FIR immediately. He can take cognizance of it. Non-cognizable offense is an offense for which, it's a petty offense for which police officer cannot register FIR. But what he does is he just makes a note of that particular offense in his diary. That doesn't mean that he cannot investigate into that offense. He can do that, but he has to take permission from the magistrate and then he can investigate. Now we come to the second category of differentiation. Bailable and non-bailable. So a lot of students who say, oh, non-bailable means will not get bail. No. Bailable offense means you will get as and by way of right at the police station. For example, you are, there is a complaint registered against you for an offense of simple hurt. And police calls you to the police station that, there is an FIR registered against you. You please come to the police station. I go to the police station. It's a bailable offense. I can immediately apply for bail and the police will itself ask me to fill a bond and the police officer will immediately release me on bail. That is called as a bailable offense. Non-bailable offense, which is of a serious nature. For example, there is an FIR registered against me for murder. Police cannot release me on bail. It is only the necessary competent court before whom I have to make a bail application, and that is when I will be given bail. Till that time, I will remain in the custody of the police. So I hope I'm clear with the differences between cognizable and non-cognizable, bailable and non-bailable. Now we move to the next slide. What is FIR? We'll deal with a lot of queries here. What is FIR? Whether information has to be given in writing or verbally, everything. Now, firstly, FIR is a recordal of information which is given first in time. Now, let me go back to my example which I had given to you at the time of offense. A sandwich vendor who stabs a student. Now, that sandwich vendor stabbed a student and two other students have seen this act. But they're scared to go to the police station. They say, "Arey, ये सब लफड़े में नहीं गिरने का अपने को types." That's how the general public in India is. They don't want to get into all this. We'll be called to the police station and we'll be called to the court and we cannot waste our time in all this. So they decide that they will not register or go to the police station. But they inform a third person, that is their friend, who has not seen the act. But that third friend of them is a responsible citizen. He has not seen the act happening, but he can still go to the police station and he can give the information to the police station. If he doesn't himself want to go to the police station, he can even give a telephonic call and inform the police. In fact, now even an e-FIR can be lodged. In certain cases where, an offense is committed against a girl and she is not in a position to go to the police station to, give the information, she can even write an email to the concerned police station. And once officer receives information of a cognizable offense, whether it is, by the person who has himself seen the act happening, that is, eyewitness, or by a passerby, or, any hearsay account, any person who has heard it from someone, or the police has received a telephonic call or an email, they are supposed to register the FIR. They are duty bound to register first information report. Now, next question. Can the information be given in writing or it has to be given verbally? I think I've already answered in the first question only. This answer has been given. It can be in writing or verbally. But if you go to the police station and you're giving it verbally, police has to write it down. After the police has written down the information which has been given by the informant, police has to explain the contents of that document to the informant. For example, the informant who has gone to the police station to give the information is not conversant with Marathi. And in Maharashtra, all the FIRs are recorded and registered in Marathi language. So it is the duty of the police to explain the informant the contents of that FIR in the language which is known to the informant. After that, informant will verify the contents and it is necessary for the informant to sign the FIR. If the informant refuses to sign on that first information report, the informant commits an offense under section 180 of the IPC. So this provision is there because it is important for the person to behave responsibly and give correct information at the police station. Now, can we have multiple FIRs being registered for the same cause of action? So the Supreme Court has said no. Obviously, the answer is no. We cannot have multiple FIRs being registered on the same cause of action. But mind you, I'll again go back to my same example. Now here the sandwich vendor had stabbed a student because they entered into an argument, and this incident happened in a fit of rage. So against the sandwich vendor, one FIR will be registered for grievous hurt under section 325. At the same time, it is possible that sandwich vendor may have his version of the story. He may say that, this student, he came and he had a pocket knife, or he had, some Swiss knife, and he showed me the knife, and therefore I stabbed him in self-defense. So if that sandwich vendor wants another FIR to be registered against the student, though arising out of the same incident, that is allowed. So it will be called as a cross complaint. So two different versions, two different complaints arising out of the same incident. That is permissible in our country, but we cannot have two FIRs being registered at two different police stations for the same act. Now, is it necessary for the police officer to register the FIR immediately? Now for this, I will take you to a very good judgment which has given guidelines as to whether police officer has to register the FIR immediately on receiving the information about commission of cognizable offense, or police can take some time to inquire into the matter. There is Lalita Kumari versus Government of Uttar Pradesh. That's a landmark judgment on the point, which is delivered by Supreme Court in the year 2014. Supreme Court has said very clearly in this judgment that once any information regarding a cognizable offense is received, police officer has to register the FIR immediately. It is mandatory for the police officer unless he feels that, he wants to verify whether the offense is cognizable or non-cognizable. In such a scenario, he can conduct a preliminary inquiry. Now, how long can he conduct the preliminary inquiry? Can it be endless? No. The preliminary inquiry has to be conducted within 7 days. If after conducting the preliminary inquiry, if the concerned officer comes to a conclusion that yes, the offense which has been committed is a cognizable offense, he will have to register the FIR. Now, if he comes to a conclusion that no, if the offense is a non-cognizable offense, then what does he do? Then he is duty bound under section 157 to immediately inform the informant that look, the information which you have given is not a cognizable offense, so we will not be able to register the FIR. That's called as the closure report. So what I'm trying to explain you is whatever that they decide to do, they have to maintain a diary, they have to make a note of everything, and they have to inform the informant about what they are going to do. Now, what if the police officer refuses to register FIR? What remedies does the informant have? Now, if he tells you that, I cannot register this FIR because the offense which has been committed is not within the jurisdiction of my police station. So in 2014, if you remember, there was a Nirbhaya's incident which had happened, and there was Justice Verma's committee who came up with some guidelines. And as per those guidelines, it is important for the police officer to take cognizance of any cognizable offense, irrespective of the fact whether that offense has been committed in his jurisdiction or not. He has to register the FIR. He has to verify if the offense has been committed in his jurisdiction or no. If he comes to a conclusion that no, this offense has not been committed in my jurisdiction, he has to register it as a zero FIR. Once he registers it as a zero FIR, then he is supposed to forward or transfer that particular FIR to the concerned police station and in whose jurisdiction that particular offense has been committed. Okay, so that was about what if the police officer refuses to register FIR on the point of jurisdiction. Now, let's come to another scenario. What if the police officer refuses to register the FIR without giving any excuse of jurisdiction? But he says that no, the offense is not made out. Or, he says that, this is not cheating, this is just breach of contract, and he doesn't register the FIR. Then what remedies does the informant have? The informant, as per section 154 of the CRPC, informant can immediately write to the superintendent of police. Once the superintendent of police receives information and he comes to a conclusion that yes, this is a cognizable offense and the concerned officer is wrong and not taking cognizance, he will direct the concerned police station that please register an offense or investigate the matter. The superintendent of police can himself investigate the matter and then direct the concerned police station to register FIR. That is also possible. Now, what if you write to the superintendent of police and unfortunately they also don't take they don't consider the information which has been given by you and they don't act on your letter? Then what do? Then you lodge a private complaint under section 190. Informant has a right to give a complaint in writing or orally in the magistrate court, and the magistrate will take cognizance. Now again, there are two ways. We can ask directly, we can tell the magistrate that look, we had gone to the police station, we have gone to the superintendent of police, nobody has taken cognizance of the offense, so you please direct the concerned police station to register FIR. So that will be under section 156(3). We will be praying that let a direction be given to the concerned police station to register FIR. There is another option also. For example, the information which I am trying to give to the police, the offense which I want the police to register is of cheating. For example, I had some transaction with my client and he has cheated me. Or for example, I'll give another example actually. I have booked a flat. Builder has taken money from me and he is refusing to give me possession of the flat. Though the building is ready, I am not being handed over the possession. Now, this is a very tricky situation. If you go with such kind of information, police will say, "Arey, he the civil hai, tumhi civil court ja," because they will say this is breach of contract. He is supposed to give you possession of the flat, but now he is refusing to do his part of the contract. So this is not an offense. You go to civil court and do what is required. So there is a very thin line. So we have to explain the police that no, it's not that he is not giving me possession. Probably he is not giving possession to 10 other people. He is gobbled our money and now he is refusing to give possession because he had the intention to cheat right from the beginning. So we have to explain this to the police. If they don't understand, which is when we have to go a step further, right to the superintendent. Then as I told you, we go to the magistrate. Now, here when I told you when we go to the magistrate's court, we have two options. One, we ask for a prayer saying that FIR direction be given to the police officer to register FIR under 156(3), or I may go a step further and I may say that forget it, I don't want any direction to be given to the concerned police station. I want process to be issued against the builder directly. So what do? I compile a complaint. I annex all the documents. I annex, his allotment, his agreement, and how he has now, been refusing to hand over possession. I compile my complaint and I file it, and I tell the magistrate that you issue process against the. That will be under section 200 of CRPC. So we were on the point of FIR. That what if the police does not register your FIR? What remedies do you have? So I was explaining about 156(3) and 200. Now, I will take you to the next slide. Now, what if the police has registered the FIR? Police officer was good enough. He understood what you're explaining him and he was happy to register the FIR. I'll again go back to our same example of the sandwich vendor. He has registered the FIR against the sandwich vendor for stabbing a college student. This is a cognizable offense. So the police can immediately register and start investigation. So what is the first thing that he can do? I'm not on what he should do. I'm just explaining you the powers, what they can do. One, they can immediately go and arrest the sandwich vendor. Two, they can seek attendance of witnesses. So if the informant informs the police officer that A and B had seen the incident, but they did not come to the police station because they were scared and they have informed me. And I, being duty bound to inform, I have informed you. So here the informant will be C. FIR will be registered and the informant will be C. And the accused will be the sandwich vendor. But it was A and B who had witnessed the incident. So they are the eyewitnesses. So police will ensure that summons is sent to A and B. And they will seek attendance of those witnesses. And they will record their version of what they have seen at the spot of the incident. So that is attendance of witnesses. Once the witnesses come to the police station, they will record their version. They will ask them questions as to what exactly happened. And after recording of their version, that statement will become a part of a report, that is the charge sheet. So that is called as examination of witnesses. Now, before I go to the charge sheet, I also want to tell you a few more things. What else can a police officer do during investigation? Now, 1 minute, I just see what my next slide is. Okay. So they seek attendance of witnesses. They record their statement. Now, there was one weapon which was used in this incident. That is the knife. So they will have to seize that knife. How do they seize the knife? As soon as they get the information, they had lodged the FIR, they went and arrested the sandwich vendor from the stall. So if the knife is there at the stall itself, they will seize the knife in presence of two witnesses who are present there, and they will make a record of that document of seizing of the knife. That record of a document for seizing of the knife which is made in presence of the two witnesses is called a Panchanama. So they will make the Panchanama of seizure of that weapon, that is the knife. They may also make the record of the spot of the Panchanama as to where exactly it happened, whether it was at the corner of the footpath or it was below a tree. So that will be called as the spot Panchanama. Now, for example, I'm explaining you another scenario. After the FIR was registered, sandwich vendor comes to know that an FIR has been registered. Somebody has gone to the police station and he is apprehending arrest. So what he will do? He will run away from the spot. When police go to the spot at the stall, they will not find the sandwich vendor. Obviously, they will not find the knife also. He will run away with the knife. And he will hide the knife somewhere. They find the sandwich vendor after 2 days. After, finding out from his relatives where he is, whatever, they ultimately apprehend him. The sandwich vendor is arrested. Now, during his interrogation, they will ask him, where is the knife? He may answer, he may not answer. If he answers and he says that I have hidden that knife, near one tree or near the stall itself. So what will the police do? They will tell him, okay, let's go to the spot and we will seize the knife from there. They will go there along with two witnesses. Police will go in a police vehicle along with two constables and 2 witnesses and the accused. They will go to the spot which will be shown by the accused, that is the sandwich vendor. He will show them the spot as to where he has hidden the knife. They will seize the knife from that place. This is called as the recovery Panchanama. This is recorded under section 27 of the Evidence Act and it is admissible in the court of law. So what I'm trying to explain you is what all does the police do during investigation. So they will make spot Panchanama, this is the seizure Panchanama, they will call the witnesses, they will record their statements. So basically investigation is a process where the police officers try to find out who exactly has committed the offense and they try to collect the proof. And after they have collected the proofs and recorded the statement of witnesses, they prepare a report, which is called as a charge sheet. Once the report is ready, they file it in the court of law. I hope I'm clear. You all can put your queries in the chat box if you all want, if you all are not able to understand anything. Now another aspect of investigation which I wanted you all to understand. That is remand, police custody, judicial custody, and what happens after judicial custody. Now, again getting back to our example, which I'll be running through this example only all throughout my webinar. So this sandwich vendor gets arrested. When he is arrested, he is in the custody of the police. So that term, when the accused is kept in the lockup of a police station, it is called police custody. When an accused is in the custody of the police can interrogate the accused and they can try to verify and find out what exactly has happened. That is called as police custody. Now, how long can an accused be kept in police custody? Mind you, he has to be produced before the magistrate within 24 hours from the time of his arrest. So for example, that sandwich vendor gets arrested today at 11 o'clock in the morning. Police is duty bound to produce him before the magistrate before 11 a.m. next day. He has to be produced within 24 hours and they have to seek permission from the magistrate if they want his custody further. If they want to interrogate him further about the commission of the offense, they will have to make an application before the magistrate that we need his custody. And now they also have to explain, that is called as remand. So they also have to explain to the magistrate as to why they need his custody. You cannot keep an accused in your custody endlessly and for no reason. You have to explain the reason for taking custody of the accused. For example, in this case, if they have not been able to seize the knife within the first 24 hours, that may be the reason for them for seeking police custody of the sandwich vendor. So they may tell the magistrate that he has used a weapon in commission of this offense and we want to seize that weapon. Until now, we have not been able to seize that weapon. So therefore, we want his custody for a period of another 48 hours or 36 hours or whatever. It is for the magistrate to look into the papers, understand the seriousness of the offense, and then decide as to how many days police custody should be granted. When an accused is produced for the first time before the magistrate is duty bound to ask him if he is fine and if he is being, tortured by the police. If the accused is being tortured, he has to inform the magistrate in the court that, they are seeking police custody only to torture me further. They have been torturing me in the last 24 hours. So all that necessary medical will be carried out and then the magistrate will decide what is to be done. So what I was explaining you is police custody. What is judicial custody? Judicial custody is when the accused is in the custody of a magistrate. So magisterial custody and jail custody, these two terms are used interchangeably. When an accused is in the jail, not the lockup of the police station, he is in jail like Arthur Road jail, Thane jail, then it is called as judicial custody. Now, when does judicial come into picture? Judicial custody come into picture. So section 167 of the CRPC gives us the procedure of police custody and judicial custody. Section 167 explains how long can a police officer keep the accused in police custody. An accused can be kept in police custody only for a period of 15 days. And he can be given police custody at one go only for a period of 7 days. Now I'll just explain you with example. Sandwich vendor, he was arrested say on 1st of July. He is produced before the magistrate on 2nd July. Magistrate can grant police custody straight for a period of 7 days only, not more than 7 days. So police custody can be granted till 8th of July. Sandwich vendor will again have to be produced by the police before the magistrate on 8th of July. If the police decides that no, now his custody is not required anymore, we have interrogated him and we have also seized the knife or the weapon, they will inform the magistrate that his custody is not required. Or at times, even if the custody is not required, police may just keep asking for a custody. But at that point of time, the lawyer who appears or who represents the accused can explain to the court that, see, he has been in custody right from 2nd of July. His interrogation is done. Statement of witnesses are recorded. The weapon has been seized. Now nothing remains. Why should he be kept in police custody? I am asking for judicial custody. So the magistrate will decide. If he decides to give magistrate judicial custody, the accused will be moved from the police lockup to the jail. Whichever jail, he may be moved to Arthur Road jail. Once the accused is moved to the jail, then his lawyer can apply for bail. A bail can never be taken for an accused till the time he is in police custody. So once judicial custody is granted, immediately we can apply for bail. So accused can be kept in police custody only for a period of 15 days. How long can he be kept in judicial custody? He can be kept in judicial custody for a period of 60 days if he has committed an offense which is punishable with 7 years or less. If he has committed an offense which is more serious in nature and which is punishable with 7 years and more, then he can be kept in judicial custody for a period of 90 days. Now the police is duty bound to investigate the offense and file a charge sheet in 60 days or 90 days, as the case may be, and they're supposed to finish the investigation and file the charge sheet in the court within 60 days or 90 days, as the case may be. Now, what if the police fails to file the charge sheet with the time which has been prescribed by law? In that case, the accused can be released on bail. That is called as default bail. If within 60 days, police has not finished the investigation and not filed a charge sheet with respect to an offense which is punishable for 7 years, the accused will immediately be granted bail. Now, another thing which I wanted to explain you, I have missed explaining you all that with respect to rights of the accused. Now, suppose I have all been explaining you that, what if FIR doesn't get registered, what right you have. But it is also possible that sometimes there are people who go and give false information just to, they may have, say, vengeance with someone and, they want to, they may have a grudge against someone and they go and give false information to the police with a view to malign the reputation of, say, XYZ person. Suppose ABC is giving a false information against XYZ only with the intention of maligning his image. Then in such a scenario, what right does the accused have? Suppose FIR gets registered on the basis of such false information given by ABC. What can XYZ do in such a scenario? So there is a concept called as anticipatory bail application, section 438 of the CRPC. In this scenario, a accused has a right to immediately approach the court of session and explain to the judge that, look, an FIR has been registered against me. I am being called upon by the concerned police officer to visit the police station. I am aware that if I visit the police station, I will be arrested. There may be a report in the media next day about my arrest, and it is going to malign my image. He can explain to the court as to how that particular FIR which is registered against him is false, and he can tell the court that I am anticipating arrest in this matter, and therefore I want protection from this court. So the court will consider his application. They will call for a say from the concerned police station. The judge will go through the contents of the FIR, and obviously it is up to the judge to decide whether to grant anticipatory bail application or not to the concerned accused. So the term anticipatory bail application, the term itself is explaining the meaning that you're anticipating arrest. It is not that you're arrested. It is also possible that an FIR may not be registered against you, but you're aware that a particular person has given false information about you at the police station, which may result in registration of FIR. In such a scenario, also, you can go and file an anticipatory bail application in the Sessions Court. Registration of an FIR is not necessary for filing anticipatory bail application. Unfortunately, in my practice, I have seen a lot of judges, or no offense, but a lot of judges say, where is the copy of the FIR? Or even when we are filing anticipatory bail application in the department will say, you have not annexed the copy of the FIR, you cannot file anticipatory bail application. This concept is wrong. Even if FIR is not registered, there is a judgment of Gurbaksh Singh on this point. Even if FIR is not registered and you are apprehending arrest in a particular matter, you can go to the court of session and you can seek anticipatory bail application. In fact, there is a recent judgment. I am not aware of the name of the parties. I can get back to you all on it tomorrow. But just 2-3 days back, Supreme Court has clarified that it is not necessary to annex the FIR to the copy of the anticipatory bail application. So that was on the rights of the accused. If the FIR which is registered is false, it is also possible that FIR which is registered is not false, but arrest may not be necessary. So custody of the accused may not be necessary. Sometimes the police just arrest an accused even if they don't want to interrogate him, just because the informant is putting pressure that you please arrest him. So in such a scenario, all these rights which are given to the accused come very handy. The purpose of custody is to interrogate and get information out. But if all the information is already available, for example, I'll give you a small example. If an offense which is registered against me is of forgery, say for example, I have forged a document and I've submitted it in the bank. Now, a police has gone to the bank. They have already seized that forged document from the bank. They have also maybe all the allied other documents which they need had also been seized by them. In this scenario, my arrest is not required. Why? Because the offense against me is of forgery. The document which I have forged is already in the custody of the police. What is required is maybe a just specimen signature or maybe my specimen handwriting to compare the forged document and my original handwriting. So for that, my custody is not required. I can be called to the police station. I can be told to give a specimen signature or handwriting, and I can be told, I can be released immediately. So in such a scenario also, we can go to the court of session and apply for anticipatory bail application. Let's come to the rights of the accused after arrest. Anticipatory bail application is before arrest. Now what happens after arrest? I think few I already told you all during the course of my lecture. Now immediately after the person is arrested, at the time of arrest only actually, the police officer is supposed to inform the accused as to why he is being arrested, for which offense he is being arrested. It is mandatory for the concerned police officer to inform the accused about the grounds of arrest. I'm sure most of the students who are in first year, or of course if you all have already cleared your LLB, you all would be knowing Durga Das Basu's case. It's absolutely clear as to what rights do the accused have. So one is the grounds of arrest. Second, immediately after being arrested, within 24 hours, the accused has to be produced before the magistrate without any delay. Third, the concerned police officer has to inform the relative or the friend of the accused about his arrest. The concerned accused has a right to consult his legal practitioner. He also has a right to be examined by the medical practitioner. Now, another thing, this is all before the trial begins. What I have explained you, the rights which I have explained you are before the trial begins. I'll just summarize again. Right to know the grounds of arrest, right to be taken before the magistrate without delay, right to consult a legal practitioner, right of informing the relative or a friend about his arrest, right to be examined by a medical practitioner. These are the rights which are prescribed under the Constitution and under the criminal jurisprudence to the accused before the trial begins. Now, after the trial begins, he has a right to free, fair and speedy trial. He has a right of free legal aid. He has a right to be present during the trial. So what happens is sometimes the accused are in custody. So I had explained you during the just 5 minutes back that if the charge sheet is not filed within the prescribed time, that is 60 days or 90 days, as the case may be, then the accused will be released on bail by default. But let's understand another scenario. The concerned police officer he was very sincere, he has investigated the matter and he has filed the charge sheet within 60 days for an offense which is punishable with less than 7 years. So he has filed the charge sheet within time. So accused loses his opportunity of getting a bail by default. So in such a scenario, what happens? He continues to remain in custody if he has not been released on bail during investigation. Now, he continues to remain in custody. Probably he has tried for bail, but his bail has been rejected. Charge sheet has been filed. Now the trial begins. So he will be produced from jail. He has a right to be present in the court on every date when his trial is posted. Every time his matter is posted for hearing, he will have to be produced from jail. He has a right to get copies of the charge sheet on the day the charge sheet is filed. He has a right to cross-examine. He has a right to human treatment. He has a right to file an appeal after his conviction. So these are some of the rights which are prescribed for an accused in the Constitution and CRPC. Now, right to appeal, revision and all that we'll be doing on the third day. That is, I'll be dealing with all that on Wednesday. Today, what I have covered is what is an offense to registration of FIR till rights of the accused. So I have only come till the filing of the charge sheet. Tomorrow we will understand what happens after the charge sheet is filed in the court. Today we have done only the investigation part. So if they have any queries, probably I can answer the queries now, and I can
Yes, ma'am.
continue tomorrow from filing of the charge sheet. That is what happens once the charge sheet gets filed in the court.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. That's perfect, ma'am. We have some questions. 2, 3 questions are there in the chat box. If I may just read it for you. The first question that a student is asking is that what is the time limit to file a charge sheet? She wants to know. Madhuri wants to know what is the time limit to file a charge sheet.
Yeah, I just explained. So the time limit for filing a charge sheet is either 60 days or 90 days. If the offense is punishable with less than 7 years, the time limit is 60 days. If it is punishable with more than 7 years, the time limit is 90 days. So for serious offenses, which are like MOCA, UAPA, murder and all that, the time limit is 90 days because they are more serious offenses. So more time is given to the police to investigate the matter.
Right. Ma'am, another question by Raj Chanwani is that under which section cross complaints like 2 different FIRs can be filed for one same cause of action?
Section. So, for example, the sandwich vendor, the student has lodged a complaint under FIR gets registered under 154 against that particular sandwich vendor. So, if the sandwich vendor also wants to lodge a complaint against that particular student, he will also go to the police station and FIR will get registered under 154 only.
Yeah.
Maybe the offense is different. So, for example, if the student is saying that I was stabbed by the sandwich vendor, the offense here is grievous hurt. So, the student's FIR will be registered under section 325 of IPC. But if the version of sandwich vendor is that this particular student had come and he threatened me with dire consequences, so the section will be different. FIR of that sandwich vendor will be registered say under section 506 for criminal intimidation. So it depends on what the version is of the informant. The offense will be registered under that section. I hope I'm clear, Rajesh.
Yes, ma'am, very much. Muskan wants to know that whether an anticipatory bail can be filed also for murder cases.
There is no bar on it. Whether it gets granted or no is a discretion of the court.
Yes. Madhuri wants to know what if a charge sheet is not filed even after 2 years of lodging of an FIR and complainant is not now interested in further proceedings. So in such case, what is the remedy? 2 years charge sheet has not been filed.
Charge sheet is not filed. The accused can get on bail. And see, sometimes what happens is, though the charge sheet is not filed, accused may be on bail, but police officers go on troubling by calling the accused to the police station again and again. I had a similar case where the charge sheet was not filed against my accused for 3 years. So and my client was from Udaipur, and the police used to keep calling him unnecessarily all the time from Udaipur. So what I did in such a scenario is I filed a writ petition in the court, High Court, saying that the time for filing the charge sheet has already lapsed. They either file a charge sheet if they have found enough evidence and material against me, or the concerned police station should be directed to file closure report. They cannot have these files pending like that. So High Court had in fact passed strictures against the concerned police officer, and they filed the charge sheet immediately within 1 or 2 weeks after the order came in the writ petition.
But ma'am, her further question is that if the complainant himself is not interested in further proceedings, means he doesn't want to continue with the case in such a scenario.
This is the difference between civil law and criminal law. Offense is never against a particular person. Offense is against a public. You cannot waste the time of the police. They have investigated the offense, and now if the charge sheet is ready, they may not be filing. That's a different aspect. But when you register the offense and police has put in their time, police is duty bound to file the charge sheet. If the complainant is not interested, it is the complainant's lookout. When the trial starts, he may come in the court and he may turn hostile. But police cannot act on the whims and fancies of the complainant, because see, these FIRs get registered against public offenses. See, if it's a cheating case, there are few cases which are public, there are few offenses which are public, and then some offenses are committed against a particular person. Like murder is an offense against the public. Here, any victim cannot say, ki, no, now I don't want to proceed with the matter. In such a scenario, the prosecution also is the state only. Complainant has no authority to come and stop the complaint or anything. But I just told you a minute back, suppose the FIR was registered for cheating, and if the parties amongst themselves have settled the matter, then that's a different thing. Even if they have settled the matter, it cannot just be closed like that. Police cannot say, they have had some exchange of money and the matter is settled, so now we are closing it. The formalities have to be done. The charge sheet has to be filed. Then in the court, if the magistrate also understands that these two parties have settled the matter, they can compound it. If the offense is compoundable, I'll be dealing with compounding of offenses tomorrow. So, if the magistrate comes to a conclusion that this offense can be compounded, it can be ended there.
Yes.
Madhuri, I can explain your query tomorrow in a detailed manner. I'm already dealing with it tomorrow.
Yeah. Ma'am, another question by Bharat is, I don't get the question very well, but what are the grounds to get a bail in non-cognizable cases and judicial custody death cases? What are the grounds to get bail in non-cognizable? I think he means cognizable cases. What are the grounds to get bail in non-cognizable cases, he says, and judicial custody death cases?
Granted in every matter after 15 days. Because I just explained, police custody can only be for 15 days. That's the only time police gets time to interrogate. After 15 days, there's automatically judicial custody.
Right. Another question is, what is the time limit to file a charge sheet in 498A case? Yet again, the same thing, and how it can impact the case. So, is there a time limit to file a
We've
charge sheet?
already answered this
Yeah.
query.
Yes. Can the terminally ill accused get a bail in non-bailable offense?
Non-bailable offense doesn't mean you can't get bail. Non-bailable offense means you will get bail only from the competent court.
Right.
So, of course, he can get bail from the competent court.
Right. Another question, what are the minimum witnesses who are required to file the Panchanama? I think she means that how many witnesses must be there in a Panchanama, minimum number of witnesses.
2 independent witnesses.
Yes. Another question, in special laws like UAPA, if the charge sheet was not filed within 90 days, then can the police ask for more time from the court or not? I think that you have already answered. If yes, then bail can be, then in that case, can the bail be denied on that ground?
Yes, if the time has been extended for filing of charge sheet, then that accused cannot get bail by default.
Yeah. I think one more question I skipped out. If police custody is granted, then whether accused can apply for bail or not, still JC is not granted. Judicial custody is not granted.
So see, they can apply for bail, but no court will entertain it, because only when the accused is in JC, that is judicial custody, will they consider the bail application. But in some scenarios, we can explain the court that his police custody is not required, and he should be immediately given JC and bail be granted. That can be done.
Yeah, there are couple of more questions, but I think you have already answered it, that whether time limit for filing in charge sheet can be extended. You have already answered that, right? So I think that is all. One last question is there by Bhavisha, but I am not able to understand what she wants to say. Same procedure will be followed if the offense is committed by a public servant. Okay. Will the procedure, as you have explained, will that procedure of investigation or will be same if the offense is committed by a public servant? I think she wants to know this.
Yes, so that's a good question. So the procedure for investigation is same, But before the investigation starts, or at times even before the FIR is registered, sanction needs to be taken from the sanctioning authority to prosecute a public servant.
Right.
So that is one thing which is different. We have to take sanction from the sanctioning authority.
Yes.
So there
Thank
is
you
a
so much.
judgment on that also. If sanction is not granted within, I think it's 3 months. If the sanction is not granted within 3 months, it is presumed to be granted, and then the police can register FIR and start with the investigation.
Okay, yes. I think that's all. Then these were the only questions remaining. I think I have not skipped out on any of the questions. So I think, ma'am, we have come to the end, and questions have been well answered by you. I think we can formally now end up our today's webinar. I think we are 15 minutes past. So I would like to now formally thank you, Poonam, ma'am. I would want to add this, I just want to say one thing since long, that you have made the whole of the procedure right from committing of an offense to the right of the accused and investigation as if it's a piece of cake, like so simple. Had this been in the court or had this been in the classroom, it would have sounded so difficult. So thank you so much for making it so simple and lucid. I think even some of the students, principal ma'am, I would want to draw your attention. Some couple of students are there, some people are there who are in 12th standard, and they asked me, ma'am, can we register for this particular webinar? And they were interested in knowing. I'm very sure that they would now know a lot of things, like as if they're a layman, but still they know so much now. Thank you so much, Poonam ma'am, for making it so simple for all of us. And I'm sure everybody would have understood this. And with a big thank you, we are looking forward to the next day tomorrow. What is in store and what more are we going to learn? So I think participants, all your queries are resolved, and I'm sure you are very happy with and you have understood. If not, Poonam ma'am is always there to answer the queries tomorrow. So we all are meeting sharp tomorrow at 5. I want to see you all at 4:55 itself, all in line, so that immediately we can start and we can see what is next ma'am is going to give us. So thank you all the participants for the patient listening to all these things. And we look forward to tomorrow's webinar. Tomorrow at 5 p.m. we are all meeting. So thank you all the participants. Thank you. A big thank you to Poonam ma'am. To see you all again tomorrow. Yes,
Sangeeta,
ma'am.
I would like to come in for a moment.
Yes, ma'am.
I had some very urgent work today. So I thought I'll just welcome Poonam and I will get out. But I said, okay, just let me hear her for 2 minutes. She was so interesting. And I realized that even our first 2 years of 5-year course students would understand what she said. But criminal law has never been my cup of tea. I wouldn't even touch it with a pair of tongs. But today I say that if I had a teacher like Poonam teaching me criminal law, I think instead of focusing on commercial laws, I would have shifted to criminal law. So Poonam, a very big thank you. You have done such a marvelous job, and I'm so proud of that. You were my student at KC Law College. Thank you very much, and God bless you.
Ma'am, it's all thanks to you, ma'am. You've been an inspiration for all of us. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. I was so happy you were there through the lecture.
I couldn't resist. Again, I'll be there tomorrow too. Thank you so much. See you tomorrow.
Yes, thank you.
Chalo, see you all tomorrow. Harsh, we can wind up with the meeting. We can end it. So see you all tomorrow. Bye for now. Stay safe till we meet again tomorrow. Bye.